right, let me see. Yes, I'm live. It works. It's me, Ori Dosif, or as you already know me, Rashid. I am back with another live. This is going to be another audio live. Again, I'll start at 4 minutes. So again, at 4 minutes, I'll begin. So you have the time to come in now and report yourself in the live chat. Israel Nerd is here. Suzanne is here. Glad to see you both here. Again, at 4 minutes, I'll begin. I'll be right back. I see Joanna here. Also, Steve VSL is here. Again, at 4 minutes, I begin. All right. All right, I'm here. Class has begun. In this live stream, I want to address the following that is seldom addressed online. By the way, let me know if you can hear me clearly, please. That's the first thing I want to check. I don't want to be doing the live and nobody hears me. Can you hear me clearly? Let me know. Can you all hear me clearly? Okay. Look, online, not only online, but a lot of communication happens online today, especially communication with a multitude of peoples, like people often talk about the Georgia Guidestones, or about the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, or they talk about the deep state. Especially Trump supporters love to talk about that. We are fine with addressing political conspiracies. We are. We're also fine with recognizing that there's shady stuff going on in the business world. When it comes to conspiracies, people have no reluctance in admitting conspiracies exist. They do. Also, people pay to go to the cinema, or they pay a Netflix subscription to watch fictional conspiracies as movies and series. So nobody nobody in the world will oppose and resist the existence of conspiracies, because they do. But there's one conspiracy people simply don't even want to admit exists. And that's the conspiracy of the masses. Let me explain what I mean. If people in the business world or some politicians come up with a plan to rob the masses, well, it's to expect it. But here's the thing. Whatever plan politicians or businessmen come up with, there needs to be collaboration from the masses for it to work. You can put your gun on one individual and force them to do what you want, but you can't put that same gun on 1,000 people. It's not going to work. Not even 100 people. You can hire a military, but the military needs to be paid. The military needs to be trained. The military are people that need to sleep also. They need to wake up, they need food. They have mortal bodies like everyone else. So even with the military, it is not possible to make sure millions of human beings get along. There must be some level of collaboration on the part of the masses for any political plan to work. And as I explained before in a previous live stream, politics in itself is a conspiracy in which the resentment of the crowd is enacted by the official called the politician. For example, if let's say you live in Texas, United States, in the state of Texas, and in the state of Texas, you can expect to see some shops with Spanish names. Why? Because Texas used to be part of the Spanish Empire, and after independence of Mexico, it used to be part of Mexico. So it's expected that you have the Spanish language in the state of Texas. Absolutely. Now, what if you suddenly wake up one day and you find, for the most part, Arabic language on the buildings? So almost everywhere you go, instead of English and Spanish names, you see Arab names. Or let's say now you would hear about Arab villages being built all over Texas. What do you think the reaction of the public in Texas will be if they hear that there are Arab villages being built and that there's going to be, you see a lot of Arab street names written in Arab? What do you think the reaction of the public will be? Let me know in the live chat. All right. I got one individual saying anger, the other confusion. Well, for Suzanne, we're refreshing because Suzanne is from Arab ancestry. But unless you're from Arab ancestry, in general, you will consider it weird that you are in the state of Texas. There's a Spanish history, an English history, and now you see Arab impact all over the place. People are going to resist, saying, "What is this?" Okay, so that in that case, because something is not in harmony with people's expectation, they resist, they escalate, they go off. Okay, so why then are they not going off at the domestic violence and the trafficking of children and young women that also happens in Texas? Why aren't they going off at those things? It is because they're in on those things. That's why. That is why. And this is something I want you to understand. And this is something all political leaders understand. All political leaders and all political scientists. I'm a sociologist, so I'm not categorized as a political scientist, but I know how political science works. Every political scientist, every political leader, and even people in the criminal realm, they understand this well. No public will tolerate an influence they're not in agreement with. No population, no public will tolerate an influence they're not in agreement with. As simple as that. If I go to Korea, I expect to see Korean letters all over the place because it's South Korea. Or not, or if I'm North Korea, which I'm not in, I would expect the same thing. I may expect some English translations for foreigners, but I have to expect to see things in Korean. If I'm in Japan, I expect to see things in Japanese. If I'm in China, I see things in Chinese. Or if I'm in Saudi Arabia or Dubai, I expect to see things in Arab letters. If I'm in the state of Israel, I expect to see things in Hebrew letters. That's how you go on and on and on. If I'm in India, I expect to see Hindi all over the place. Now, the only place where you can see Chinese letters all over the place are in a Chinatown, a tiny, a busy street, or a tiny village where you have a lot of Chinese businesses. That's the only place outside of China or Taiwan where you can see a lot of Chinese letters all over the place. If you would walk through New York and you'll see more and more Chinese letters all over the place, you're going to think, are the Chinese taking over? We can't understand Chinese. Why are we keeping encountering Chinese? Look, it's common sense. It's also natural sense. A community has a history, and you should see that history reflected in the present. Any foreign influence either has to be incorporated in a community or it's tolerated. What I mean by that? For example, when you go to the west of Africa, let's say Cote d'Ivoire, the name of the country is French. Why? Because the French colonized the area in the 19th century till the mid 20th century. So the French language has been incorporated in that community, African community over there. So you do see the French language all over the place, but you don't see French culture all over the place, like you see in Paris. So that's what I mean. It has to be incorporated or it has to be tolerated. Suzanne, I don't know. I don't understand your question. Please elaborate, please. Now, when a community or any public does not want to tolerate nor incorporate an influence, then they will find any excuse to oppose it. That's how simple it is. That is why when politicians seek to trick the masses, they always play on the insecurities of the masses. A politician will never come out with something new. And this is something you may have realized already if you've been around for a while. But I need to mention it. A politician will never come with anything new. Yes, Suzanne, that's true. The world is similar to a death cult. Absolutely. Just like the Bible says in the book of Proverbs, those that hate me love death. So that's what we're dealing with. A politician will never come with anything new. They will only recycle past hurt and resentment within the masses, and they will promise relief for the past hurt and resentment. That's the only thing they do. The only thing politicians can do is recycle past resentment and past hurt. And they gave a false promise of relief or of closure. That's the only thing they do. And while they are tricking the masses with false promises of relief or closure, now they can introduce something different. But no politician comes up front with what they tend to do in the long run. Sometimes they hint towards it, but they will never upfront say it. For example, if, let's say, in the state of Texas, I'm using Texas example again. Yes, let's say in the state of Texas, the government of Texas intends to sell a lot of land to Chinese corporations. So in the future, you'll see a lot of Chinese corporations all over the place. No candidate for the governorship or no local council member will come out and say, we are going to hand over 20% of taxes to China. They won't say that. They will distract the masses with some other type of nonsense that goes on, whether it's resentment against the Mexican migrants, whether it's racial tensions, or whether it's resistance towards the rainbow community. They will use any resentment or past hurt in the Texas community. And while they keep the Texas community entertained with all this conflict, behind the scenes, you have all those Chinese corporations purchasing land. Before you know it, see a lot of Chinese people walking around, owning land. And then you realize, what happened past 5 years? Oh, well, we were distracted with resentment against Antifa, Black Lives Matter, against the rainbow community. We've been resisting Biden also. And meanwhile, this was going on. That's how it always goes. Fallen mankind is neophobic. A neophobe is someone who's afraid and terrified of anything new. Worldly people by default are neophobes. There's one thing to be reluctant when you're unfamiliar with something. For example, if someone invites you to go to the forest to pick some mushrooms, let's say you're not familiar with mushrooms and you know which mushrooms are poisonous or not, you're going to be reluctant about it. Or if someone serves you a dish and you don't know what the food is, you're going to ask, what is it? So reluctance to something unknown is healthy. But once this reluctance becomes pathological, because you never want to be exposed to anything different at all, then you are a neophobe. So fallen mankind are a bunch of neophobes. They are afraid of anything new or anything refreshing. Fallen mankind has the tendency to recycle old habits and old conflicts. That is what we call the status quo. What we call the status quo, it comes from Latin status quo ante bellum, which means the societal state before the war. The status quo is just the recycled conflict and past hurts acted out in the present. So let's say you have this Vietnamese province where 500 years ago the Chinese Empire invaded and killed a lot of people. And since then, it's been this resentment towards the Chinese. Now, this happened 500 years ago. And since then, many of the people of that Vietnamese province, they developed this antagonism towards the Chinese. Even though there's been many improvements in the relationships with Chinese people over past centuries, there's still this resentment over there. Why? Because the people there are worldlings, and worldlings want things to be familiar all the time. And because 500 years ago, a generation grew up with resentment towards the Chinese, and they raised their children into resentment, it went on and on and on. So if any Vietnamese individual from the south of Vietnam comes with a pro-China attitude, he is lynched or he's excommunicated. And that is something that you will notice a lot. People are not willing most of the time to embrace better. This neophobia that fallen mankind has implies that most of the time they're not willing at all to embrace anything better. They will complain and murmur about how bad things are. But when you come with a suggestion that will work out better, at first they will say, you're right. They will praise you for your suggestion. But behind the scenes, they're complaining about saying, who does this guy think he is? Nobody asked for his opinion. Who does he think he is? Just messing with our affairs, blah, blah, blah. Behind the scenes, they're murmuring about you. Why? Because for things to be better, you not only need to admit things are wrong, but you actually have to participate in things becoming better. But fallen mankind has this tendency to flee all the time and to want to escape all the time. And that's why they are not cooperating, not collaborating with improvement. They just want to escape. Suzanne, thanks you very much for your super chat donation. Very much appreciated. So, the number one conspiracy that's been going on since the fall of man is this: people sabotage themselves and their communities. People sabotage themselves and their communities. That's the number one conspiracy that's been going on throughout the centuries. It doesn't matter where you go. You can go to some Amerindian community in South America, or you can go to Sweden, you can go to North Korea, or you can go to Tibet, or at the Austronesians in Australia. Wherever you go, you will find this. People sabotage themselves as well as the people around them. And together, as groups, fallen mankind sabotage itself. That's what society is. Society is nothing but one big self-sabotage that people enact. Society, I repeat, is nothing but one big self-sabotage that people enact. Haven't you noticed that anytime things go wrong in a community, or anytime there's a chronic tragedy, they say, well, that's just how society is. But hold on a minute, aren't we the one enacting this thing called society? So if we enact society, and society is not going to enact with of ours, it means that we are the ones enacting this toxic climate. So it's on us. But then people want to either vote for politicians or they crave officials that will make their enactment of society better. So that's why I explained to you before, political solutions don't exist, because politics is a conspiracy in itself to hide the neglect of the masses. Now, that's why a lot of those politicians are behind those controlled oppositions you see out there. Many of those resistance groups, whether it's Antifa, Black Lives Matter, or whether it were the Yellow Vests, or whether some of those New Age movements, or even some of those church movements either, most, not all, I'm not saying all of them, but most of those resistance groups out there are controlled opposition. It goes like this. The masses don't want solutions. They just want to complain and escape. But you can't always escape, especially not when you're millions of people together. Millions of people together escaping, that's going to be people stamping upon one another all the time, not going to work out. So what happens is the public enacts this fear construct society in which nobody has to take any blame and responsibility for all the dysfunction. And when dysfunction becomes way too much and into your face, politicians now generate those resistance groups so that the victims of the dysfunction will feel hurt. And because the victims feel hurt by the resistance group, they join the resistance group. And they think by joining a resistance group, they can get things done. But that resistance group is financed and run by the same politicians that are assigned by the community. So the resistance group is there to prevent the victims, as well as the collaborators of the victims, to turn on the masses in general. Let's say you have a lot of sexual molestation of children going on in a community. And a lot of those children grow up and become defective adults. Now, if you have tens of thousands of children that were sexually molested, and now they're all adults, you're going to have tens of thousands of defective adults around, traumatized. And once those adults who have been traumatized sexually as children realize, oh dear, people just allowed bad stuff to happen to me, that is going to breed anger in those people, and at some point that anger is going to come out. So to prevent the anger of tens of thousands of grown people to act out and disrupt the ease of society, now you have this activist group that stands against child abuse. And now all the adults who've been severely abused as children, they feel recognized by this activist group. And they join this activist group. In the activist group, they now get compensation, emotional compensation, sometimes financial compensation. And because of that, the masses, who are actually the collective perpetrators, can avoid a crash. That is why a public protest should be a tool that would lead to a further agenda. If you are protesting is the first step. Then you're followed by a policy you want to enforce. But if people only protest over and over again, that means there's no policy. It means just a distraction. Let me tell you one thing. Most of the activist groups today are fake. I'm not saying the people that are activists are fake, but the groups are fake. Because the groups are financed by the same politicians that keep the violence going. So, look, real activist groups have a policy that will lead to actual change. But this thing, the public doesn't want change. And truth being told, even many of the people that join those activist groups, they just want relief and ease from the troubles. And to Ott poses questions, no, I don't do neither, not at the moment. So, people in general are neophobes. Yeah, but Rashid, what about people going on exotic holidays? That's what it is. Those are holidays. People don't mind going outside their quote unquote familiar zone for a little while just to refresh themselves from the toxicity back at home. But eventually, they will go back to the toxicity at home. That's why you have holidays. Holidays or vacations are just seasons of relief of maybe a few days a year or 2 weeks in a row, or sometimes a month or two, where people temporarily escape from toxicity they're participating in. But eventually, they go back to the toxicity. Why? Because if they won't have, if they didn't have holidays or vacations, the toxicity would become too much and they would explode. And you don't want hundreds of thousands of people exploding because they've been intoxicated all the time. That's why vacations are invented. And every time the public experiences some vacation, they think, oh, things are getting better. Look, you have 12 months in a year. Those are 52 weeks. If only 4 weeks a year you have vacation, you don't have to work because there's money saved and you just travel around and you're at ease. If only 4 weeks of the 52 weeks you have ease, then you've been set up. But because every week you have this thing called the weekend where people can recharge, people don't notice that they only have 4 weeks that are actually free to relax. So they don't notice at all how they're being drained. Because here's the thing, let's say the weekend did not exist, like it used to be in the 19th century. You would work 6 days, and on Sunday you have to go to church. After 20 years, you're going to realize, hold on a minute. The only days I'm free is with those Catholic holidays, in which includes Christmas and Easter. And the rest, just working. Eventually, people are going to revolt. And that's what happened in 1830, 1848, and in the early 1870s. The young people realized, hold on a minute, mom and dad are only working, and getting tired all the time. What is this? That's why in the early 20th century, the vacations were invented so that the enslaved people, now I'm not talking about blacks, I'm talking about worldwide, the enslaved people don't realize if they're enslaved. So instead of people collectively deciding, you know what, this needs to be abolished, we need to regulate labor in a better way, they just get along. And by them getting along, they're collaborating with them being victimized. So they cease being victims from that point on. From that point on, they're not victims anymore. From that point on, they're just collaborators. Someone who truly wants to escape being enslaved, there's nothing you can do to stop them from breaking free. Now, breaking free may take a little while, but they will break free at some point. If you have a 20-year-old that's complaining about how the world is organized, but he still gets along just because he doesn't see any option. Someone that's 25, okay, but if someone is 30 and beyond, and they still have not researched any way to be flexible, then you need to begin to ask yourself, are they really victimized by society, or are they just complaining because they don't want to deal with what's going on? Oh, metaverse. Meta is Greek for beyond. Verse comes from Latin versum. And versum, also called, people pronounce it versum, but it's versum. Versum means spoken sentence. So beyond the spoken sentence, Greek and Latin, Greco-Roman. So that signifies the Roman Empire. So universe is uno, that's Latin for one, versum, spoken sentence, a single spoken sentence. That refers to Genesis chapter 1, then Father speaking earth into existence. Meta where Zoom or metaverse is going beyond the word of God. So that's going to be another level of escapism. And unfortunately, it's sad to say, most people are going to fall for it. So soon, instead of going out and form relationships, people will have virtual relationships with non-existent people. Or they will have it with avatars of people in this virtual metaverse. And look, if in this metaverse, in this virtual world, you can be anything you want, and in real life out there, you're stuck, then hey, if the metaverse, which connects to your brain quickly, can give you a sensation and see if you're far better off, then that's going to be the new thing people get attached to. Now, but apart from the metaverse, because there will be people saying, no, I'm not doing this. What you need to understand is that no influence that the public does not consent to will be left alone. Now, if you have influence in a community and you have paranormal aid, then despite the resistance of the public, your influence will endure because you have some spiritual cover, even though it's demonic. Or if you are a believer walking by faith, then your influence will also endure because you have the Holy Spirit himself behind you. Without any spiritual cover, whether it's paranormal or supernatural, you cannot have any influence on the earth. Anyone out there having some influence without being backed up spiritually, they're killed, or they're imprisoned, or they're beaten up, or they're shut down very quickly. They're sabotaged. That's why most people out there that you see in the world with some public success, they're part of some cult, because they know very well without a spiritual backup, they're finished. That's why most people out there with some public success, they move away from their relatives and common people, and they live in especially inside neighborhoods. Look, you know what type of people you deal with by looking at what they put up with. Look, sometimes you need to tolerate certain things. So I'm not saying that if there's oppression going on and people don't know what to do with oppression, that you say, oh, those are bad people because they tolerate oppression. Now, there are things the public tolerates because they don't know what to do about it. All right? However, when you notice things in a community that people can easily shut down, when you notice bad things in a community that people can easily shut down, I'm talking about objective bad things, not subjective things. When there's an objective bad thing going on in the community, whether it's neglect of children, or whether it's financial abuse of the working class, or whether it's child molestation that's frequent, or whether it's things like racism or classism or whatever. Anytime you see any objective wrong that persists in the community, now you know what type of community you're dealing with. Because the thing they put up with is what they enable. The thing they put up with is the thing they are facilitating. Look, a single individual is not able to accomplish that much on their own. Absolutely not. But if two or three come together, that's already powerful. So if you have a community where you have where it's persistent child abuse or sex trafficking, or any type of long-term harm that goes on, and you don't notice any resistance collectively from the people, now you know that you're dealing with a community that's toxic. I'm not saying everyone in that community is toxic, no. But community overall is toxic because there's certain things they should never put up with, and yet they do. You learn a community by the things they put up with. Now, some communities hide what they're putting up with. Other communities are not successful in hiding what they're putting up with. That's the difference. So if you have a community where you can clearly see they're putting up with a lot of bad stuff, and then you have another community where everything appears fine, don't think that community where everything appears fine is better off than community where you can clearly see what they're putting up with. Some communities are just better in disguising their violence. Other communities are not. For example, if you would go to the United States and you would go to Chicago or Baltimore, any place where you have a high percentage of African Americans living, and you see that there's a lot of gang violence going on and a lot of toxic music being played that denigrates their own women, it's easy to say, whoa, what are those African Americans putting up with? These people are not in the right mind. But when you go to, let's say, the state of Kansas or somewhere else in the Midwest, and you don't notice the same things you notice with the African American community in certain cities, you may falsely think, well, those people of European ancestry in the Midwest, they are more stable and more well managed than the African Americans. Now, it's true that African Americans in general are unstable due to a lot of psychological trauma. However, in the Midwest of the United States, you have a lot of child trafficking and sex trafficking going on. But the public hides it all. And you have a lot of incest, and you also have a lot of insurance fraud in which spouses kill one another to get insurance money. Because you have a lot of life insurance fraud going on. But if you don't notice, if you don't see clearly all the violence they put up with, you may think, well, these people here are safer to be around. But that's just a deception. Some communities, or, well, as far as you can call them communities, some places are better in hiding their violence than others. That is the PR. That's why you have mainstream media. Mainstream media is there to cover up the violence the masses are in on. That's it. So if you, let's say, go on holiday to, let's say, Italy. You're on holiday in Italy for 3 weeks. You visit Milan, you visit Rome, you visit Naples, or you also visit Ravenna or Bologna or Venice. You visit all those Italian cities. Everything is happy and great. You like the Italian people. Okay, you're on holiday. Of course, you're going to get the best experience. You're a tourist. And as a tourist, people will treat you better than they treat their own people on a daily basis. So as a tourist, on the short term, you'll get the best treatment. Let's say you don't come as a tourist, but you actually move to Italy and you live there. Now you will see what's really going on over there. Now you will see that the south of Italy has been impoverished for centuries, and it's criminal organizations that are kind of in charge there. And now you'll see that even in the north, where there's a lot of wealth, there's a lot of discrimination on the workplace, even between Italians. So now you see, oh my God, what the heck is this? But when you came there for a holiday or a vacation, the experience was different. Mainstream media distracts you with certain violent events so you don't see the overall violence the public puts up with. Mainstream media is there so you don't notice how unreliable the people around you really are. Because society needs you to, to be blind towards its sabotage. That's why mainstream media gives you facts, but it will never give you the truth. Mainstream media may report on crime. Let's say in Paris. Let's say you take Paris, okay? And the mainstream media in France mentioned about crime in Paris. And every time they show you the perpetrators are people of Moroccan ancestry or from Algerian ancestry. So what's going to happen? Because you keep encountering news reports about crime in Paris, and you all 9 out of 10 times see someone from Algerian or Moroccan ancestry, you are deformed into thinking that Moroccan and Algerian people are more criminal than other people in general. That's the spell they put on you. But here's the thing: mainstream media only reports crime of one neighborhood in Paris. If they report the crime of all the neighborhoods in Paris, you would see that there's crime in all the neighborhoods of Paris, and the crime amongst other ethnic groups are even higher. But if they would give you the full picture of reporting all the crime in Paris, you would think, whoa, Paris is one big toxic place with a lot of violence. So you would avoid Paris. So to hide the toxicity of Paris, they will focus on just 1 or 2 neighborhoods, and they will put the blame on one specific ethnicity. So mainstream media, just like Chuba said in the live chat, is also there to keep us in a state of negativity. So they both hide the toxicity of the crowd, and you want to keep the same crowd in toxicity by distracting them with fake solutions. So all I want to teach you here is to not be distracted by conspiracy theories. Don't be distracted by the Georgia Guidestones. Don't be distracted by Agenda 2020. Well, the agenda is already outdated, or Agenda 2030. A lot of people now focus on Agenda 2030 or the Georgia Guidestones or on the Great Reset. Look, don't be so focused on all those political conspiracies. The number one conspiracy is, or the number one question you need to ask is, why are the people putting up with all of this? And now you know why. Because they want to flee. They want to escape all the time. That's the defect of fallen mankind. That's why all of us need to become born again and renewed our minds. So it's the toxic denial of the masses that keeps all the violence on the earth going. That is the conspiracy you need to see. Once you see that conspiracy, you will never fall for mainstream media deception anymore. Once you see the conspiracy, namely that fallen mankind escapes all the time instead of facing situations to find solutions, once you see that, you will now realize that, hold on a minute, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, or the Onassis families, or the Lee dynasty, or the Vatican, or the Jesuits, or the Club of 300, or whoever those satanic organizations are, they're not really such a threat towards me directly. Because all those satanic groups wouldn't be able to accomplish anything on the earth if it weren't for the masses escaping all the time. Because all those satanic organizations, they use the escapism of the masses to get things done. So it's useless to fight against the satanic governments and satanic organizations if it's the masses that keep it going. So does it mean that you just bow down and collaborate with those satanic governments and those satanic organizations? No, you don't do that. But you're also going to fight them in protest and guerrilla warfare, thinking you're going to achieve something. Now look, if it comes down to rioting because things are going way too far because of police brutality, that's different. If there's a lot of police brutality and people are not willing to do something about it, then the target people must do something physically about it. That's different. That's a exception. But in general, don't think that by taking direct action against those organizations, you're going to achieve things better. No, things will only get better when the people become better. Samuel, what you said is correct. All those conspiracies are not compared to mankind's fallen state, not fallen nature, fallen state. Human nature is good, but in a fallen state, it's toxic and self-destructive. So the fallen state of mankind is the main problem. Those political conspiracies are just jokes. The, the Illuminati is a big joke. The Great Reset is a big joke. Agenda 2030 is a big joke. All those conspiracies that happened are just big jokes. The thing is, why are the masses in on the joke? The joke is only funny when people agree it's funny. So the jokers can only have their fun if the people laugh. And in this case, the people are laughing at the jokes. If the people don't laugh at the joker is finished. So instead of hating and fighting and resenting the jokers, in this case, I mean those satanic organizations and their conspiracies, why are the masses laughing? Now look, people are not literally laughing at all the violence goes on. I'm just using jokes as a parable over here. Just like a joke is only funny when people agree it's funny, the same way, the only reason all these satanic governments and these satanic conspiracies are even relevant is because people make it relevant. They make it relevant by either ignoring them or by being fearful about them. And those that are fearful about them may even end up fighting them or joining them, trying to influence the beast from inside, which will never work. Look, if someone jumps on you with a knife and you give them a punch to the face to bring to the ground, okay, that's different. That's different than you just being upset and escalating because you don't have your way. Okay? If people neglect you over and over again, and they want to insist on going too far, and you escalate back out of necessity because you are being put in a corner, that's different. So when a group of people riot and protest and escalate because they've been downtrodden for so long, that's different. That's different than people just escalating, looking for victims to feel better. I'm not condoning violence. I'm just saying, if you've been forced into a corner, if you've been in danger so much, at some point you explode. All right? If you're at home and some burglar enters in, you lose your mind, because especially if you have children sleeping in your house. But here's the thing, there's a difference between a violent reaction because you were endangered and you just being violent because you want to escape. And people in the world don't see the difference. The thing is, you shouldn't ignore what's going on, but you shouldn't fight against it either. You should replace it with better. You should sabotage the violence by replacing it with better. So if there is a resistance group, let's say there's a lot of gangs in a community, and those gangs are substitute families because the family structure in the country is messed up. So there's a lot of poverty and a lot of messed up family structures. So what do? You teach about sexual health and about economic power. And by teaching that, eventually you'll have a positive influence that will shut down the relevancy of the gangs, because the gangs only relevant because people need a substitute economy. But if you teach sexual health, which will lead to better families, then you already shut down the necessity for gangs. So instead of having a war on gangs, go to the root. Why do gangs even exist? They exist because the family structures are messed up. And why are the family structures messed up? Because people are sexually diseased. So people need to be informed about sexual health, long-term sexual health for the community. So begin to enforce that. When you enforce that, you're replacing the bad. The bad goes on with better. If you fight the bad, things will end up worse. Fighting the bad will end up worse. No, You replace the bad with better. That's what you need to do. But that requires humility, self-reflection, and for facing this urge to control. And those are the things worldlings want to do, especially not the last one, for facing this urge to control. And that's why they end up in a loop, generation after generation, fighting the same issues over and over again. Look, of course, you can provide solutions and educate people in a fallen state. Christ did the same thing. The question is, not everyone will submit. So what do you do then? You collaborate further with those that do submit, and then you enforce better in the environment. Eventually enforce better in the environment, whether or not people consent or not. And the people that keep resisting will reprobate themselves and destroy themselves. That's how we do it. So we enforce better, and those that keep resisting the better will end up destroying themselves and exterminating themselves. That's how it's going to be. That's how we believers should do it, because only believers can do that. Worldlings, including pagans, cannot do that. So that's why Christ told us, if people are not willing to admit reality and keep insisting in filth, shake dust off your feet, because such people are delusional and therefore they're dangerous. So you continue with those that will collaborate with solutions, and with them you enforce better in the environment. Yeah, the Josephat effect, indeed. The King Josephat effect is based on a history in the Old Testament where you had several armies coming to destroy Judah and Jerusalem and the capital Jerusalem. And King Jehoshaphat, instead of being militarily occupied, he commanded everyone to sing praises and to decree praises to the Heavenly Father. And this caused a confusion to happen amongst the foreign militaries, and they lost their mind again to attack one another and exterminate one another. So when the Judean military came, we're all corpses. Well, such an effect you can also have around you. If the public, as well as those satanic organizations, don't want to stop nor comply with Christ, you walking by faith, walking in the light with fierce decrees declarations, you will cause them to turn on one another and to stop one another. So that's how we do it. All right. So don't fight and don't flee. Replace. Overrule things. I can only do that with the resurrection power of Christ. All right. That was the live stream. If there are any questions related to this topic, you can ask them right now. I'll just stick around to see if I get any questions. For those that have to leave, you can leave. There's nothing wrong with that. Thanks for being here. I'll wait for a minute if I see any questions. If I don't get any questions, I'll close on the live stream. Samuel, you can only discern the voice of the Spirit after you walk by faith. But when you walk by faith, that eventually you'll learn how to discern the voice of the Holy Spirit. It's not something I can teach you. It's something you need to experience for yourself. And the way you figure out is really those spirits when you're Christ-centered. People that are Christ-centered, they can discern the voice of the Holy Spirit easily. People that are self-occupied or sickly escaping, they will fall for demonic voices very quickly. Like what happens in the New Age. By the way, believers, or I mean saints, I feel an explosion of demonic infestation about to happen very soon. with the crowd being traumatized by what happened the past 2 years, there's going to be an onslaught of violence increasing all over the world, and it's going to bring more demonic activity because demons have more to feed on. So be armed up in the spirit and be vigilant in the faith. Don't be paranoid nor depressed. Be vigilant and joyful at the same time. And also test the spirits indeed. Yes, that's it for now. Keep on growing with Christ. I'll talk to you soon.